I'm going to talk to you today about PassionWorks Studio in Athens, Ohio. Let's see. We'll go right to the beginning. Well, so what we do at PassionWorks Studio is we're a collaborative making place. And a big piece of our artwork is to create a place for making. And the people are absolutely at the core and the most important part of the process. So it is a collaborative community art center where we explore materials, and we do this in a process that we don't have the end result figured out. It's an experiment, and it's all about problem solving and discovering together. And so that's the difference, I think, between art and craft, is like sometimes you might do a project with a group of people and you already know what the end result is. And so it's replicating somebody else's concept, which can have an interest. But our interest is discovering together, so that everybody who's part of the process, their spirit, their talent, their interest, their time is evident in the work. So it becomes very, very personal, and it becomes, it manifests the experience and the spirit of our community naturally. We don't have to try and do that because we naturally do it. So here we have Noah working with Ohio University students making giant puppet heads, these big giant balls of paper mache. And so Noah is a passionwork artist, absolutely brilliant, and studies art making quite a bit, and he's working with Ohio University students. And what's great about this situation is that Noah is the leader in this process because he has practiced paper mache more than the visitors, and so he's the leader and the teacher and the instructor in a sense in the process of making. So one of the things at PassionWorks is that we study low-tech, high-magic. I learned this technique from Daniel Polnow, who originally taught me how to make puppets. And our core group of artists at PassionWorks are artists with developmental differences. And so the whole community is involved in our process, but at our core are people who have developmental differences. And so that the aesthetic interests, ideas, problem solving really comes from the nugget of our group, and then we explore the world through that process. So PassionWorks has been in place for 21 years. It started in a sheltered workshop, but the idea of it came, like everything has its spark, has its nut, and my nut was working and living at the Athens Mental Health Center. I had a brother who was institutionalized, and he was institutionalized, he's 2 years older than I, and so all my life I grew up knowing that I had a brother somewhere else. And I was really curious as to where he was, because I had another brother who was chasing me around the house and like torturing me, in the best way, waking me up at midnight, we got to go for pizza, Patty, get up, that kind of thing. And we were really close. And then I had another brother who was in this mystical place, almost like this castle. It was this huge institution. And so he passed when he was 12, I was 10. And so it's been in my tissue to be curious about where he was, and then what was going on there. So when I came to Ohio University, the psychiatric hospital was it was active, and it's this big, huge building up on the hill. And I volunteered there on Wednesdays. And then I was invited to live on ward in exchange for room and board. So it filled my dream of, could I have, he lived somewhere else and I had this amazing life. I mean, I had I said flute, and a flute showed up. I said I really like to play softball. My dad was the coach. My mom was the Girl Scout leader. It's like I had everything and then I had this brother who was somewhere else. So I lived there, and I saw lots of people. I knew people. My roommates were awesome, but I saw this structure as oppressive. that it was it was so much control, and people were just failing to thrive. People who had just incredible imaginations, beautiful hearts. We had fabulous conversations. And I met this woman, Anne Randolph, and she also lived at the Mental Health Center, and she was a student at OU studying theater. And she would walk down the hallways, and people would just run to her. Just run and be like, Anne. And she wrote plays and put on plays with people up at the hospital, and they would do them for the community. And I was like, if one person can create this kind of change in this environment, I want to be an Anne Randolph of the world. That's what I want to do. So I said, okay, her thing was theater and writing and comedy. My thing was visual arts. So I started making art with people, and I was studying photography at Ohio University, and locked men's was my main ward that I worked on. And I would just sit and draw with the guys, and we would have these fabulous connection and conversations without talking. And I thought, okay, this is it. This is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I'm going to be making an art studio where people on the outside of community are brought right to the center and are at the heart. So the experience of living at the Mental Health Center and finding this passion I've been able to put into action, which I am so grateful for. The hospital closed, and structure for people with mental health has really shifted since the 80s and the 90s, and I couldn't live out my dream at the Mental Health Center. It wasn't possible. But I was introduced to a sheltered workshop, and a sheltered workshop is a supported work environment for people with developmental differences. And when I went on my tour, basically what I saw was a community arts center waiting to happen. Amazing people, giant tables, people showing up every day in anticipation of doing something. And I was like, okay, I want to bring my boat here and see what can happen. So at this sheltered workshop, people were capping pens. That was their job. And there were some people who had been capping pens for 30 years. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. What if we put in an experimental art studio in this space and see what happens? Oops. And the first, we did a grant through the Ohio Arts Council, and in 3 weeks, we made 100 papier-mâché birds. During this process, we had community members come in. We made these birds. I fell in love with the process and the people I was working with, and I was like, okay, I found my home. So now we just have to figure out how to keep it going. And the second year we did another grant, and they wanted at the sheltered workshop more community inclusion and also employment options. And so we made a show called A Story of Flying, and we hung it up at the Kennedy Museum, which is now a museum, which was the old mental health center. And we did an installation where 450 people helped work on this project, come in, and we went out and did workshops. And it was illustrating a poem written by Denny Nafziger, celebrating a new baby in our community and a family, and Gabe was born with Down syndrome. And this poem reads that his sister and he are going to speak a language all their own and teach each other to fly. And it was just a beautiful poem, because Denny also has a sibling with a disability, and she just knows that there's a special connect. She has a special connect with her sister, Patty. And so we made this beautiful project, and I just was like, okay, look at that. Look at what we made. It's gorgeous. That's lovely. But a university class came up and wrote a response paper in Rosemarie Basili's class. And one of the students didn't write about the artwork. He wrote about his regret. And he wrote about his regret as a child in his neighborhood with his friends. And they would beat up another kid in the neighborhood because they saw him as the other. He had a disability. And he never really thought about it until he read who made the art and was inside this art. And he wrote about how he realized that he had more in common than difference. And I thought, if we can make art that is beautiful and creates spectacle and attention, but can shift the thinking of people into a more compassionate, loving attitude, then this is what we are going to do. And so from this day forward, we have made the largest, the brightest, the sparkliest stuff we can absolutely do to create the attention, ultimately to understand how we can think differently and create the communities that we talk about. That when we say community, everybody's in the community, not just the few. We're all in there. And so we're not asking to be part of the community. We're inviting the community to be part of itself and us. And we're really happy to create those opportunities. So then the artwork went to Purple Chopsticks Restaurant and filled that space. And Ed was like, oh, Patty, people want to buy the art. And I'm like, Ed, it's not for sale. It's sacred. And he's like, Patty, make some more. And I'm like, genius. So then Ed started selling the work for us. And I'd see him and he'd just hand me like fistfuls of cash and checks. And I was like, okay, now we can create employment. We make stuff, we sell it, and then we'll have money so that we can do what we want to do. And so the money that we make is, the intention is to make more stuff, generate more love, and to share what we do with the world. Because world domination is our intent. So in the studio, so then we received another grant. We received 2 9-month grants back to back. And my first day, I was like, okay, here we go. And this a giant of a man came into the studio, really very hard of hearing, and couldn't use language to talk to him. But really huge guy. I was like, I don't know. And we were writing on tiles. And I was a little intimidated, and he wrote, to who I am writing, there is a strength between our heart. And he handed it to me. And I was like, oh my God. So like in that moment, he gave me such a gift. I never want my perception of another person to limit their opportunity. And the staff didn't know that he was literate because everybody was using verbal language in order to communicate. And it changed his life. So he became our poet. We would just write a topic at the top of a page, and then he would go. Brilliant, brilliant man. His physicality and what we see as a deficit was limiting his ability to be part of the larger world. And he was magnificent and a great teacher. So we continued to make work. Wendy Miner, unbelievable. She's been with the studio for 20 years. Working with Marty in this picture here. And I saw this woman with incredible talent and ability to communicate and work through the arts do everything possible to make the arts available to anybody who wanted to do it. So here she is sitting on the table, working, she and Marty collaborating. Marty would make a line and she would follow it with a paintbrush, and they would make these collaborative dance paintings that were just incredible. People would come in and we'd have art nights. Kids would come in. So, because if you live within an institutional culture, you don't see kids that often. You don't see typical society. And so we were busting that open, and families wanted to come in. They wanted these experiences for their kids and themselves. So we believe that connection, purpose, and belonging are the key to a beautiful life where we can thrive. Without it, the opposite is true. Shelter, food, connection, purpose, and belonging. And so this is what we do in these spaces, is to create that spirit so that when people come in, they're welcomed. It can't work without them. So our artists have been making and exploring for 21 years and just blowing the minds of, I think, other collaborators and audiences. So the crazy thing is about the arts, like, a lot of people are like, I'm not creative. I can't draw a straight line. What you can do is come into Passionworks, and Passionwork artists can help you through that mind thought. And the more that we do, the more there is to do, the more that opens up. Creativity is beginning. Creativity finds you when you're working. And David Dewey, one of the first Passionwork artists, he was the brave one who came in the studio and worked with me first. These are his first drawings in the studio of a washer and dryer. And we had a visiting artist, Kate Kern, who fell in love with the washers and dryers and the appliances and made this appliance quilt. And David, he was at the workshop, but he has hands that are frozen, and his job match was folding and stuffing envelopes, and it was really difficult. So he would be in the studio for 6 hours a day. And over time, like things were being made, he then changed his name to Pepe Le Doux, started wearing sunglasses, a beret. And the thing is that he had a place, he had a title, he was the artist. And that, that's what we all want a place in the world. And his artwork, just phenomenal. Ed opened another restaurant called The Starving Wolf, and his wolf was the logo. And we made ceramic sculpture, and his work has been really involved in all kinds of graphic design. But ultimately, I'm like, David, you found it, man. Like, there's no better place to be than the art studio. But his dream fully is to be a DJ. That's what he wants to be, right? I'm like, all right, No, but it's like understanding what his he has multiple dreams. And so he would call Power 105 every morning and talk to Robin Barnes and say, what he wanted to hear on the radio. And it ended up that they had a David Dewey picks of the day, and they would play his music. And then Robin started coming and having her lunch and hanging out with David. And then PBS did a documentary on our studio and called Robin and said, we have a PSA for you to, do on the radio. And she's like, calls me, and she's like, hey, I really like David to read this PSA. And I have learned not to say no, right? I've learned that when there is love in the room, you just surrender to the person who's offering their services. And I was like, okay. And so David went into the studio, and she whispered in his ear each word, and he repeated each word 3 times. She then took that recording, and she edited it down so he was absolutely fluent in reading that paragraph. I could never ask another human being. I didn't even know you could do that, right? I would never ask somebody. But the love that Robin has for David brought us to that point. And I have never seen him happier. And when the radio would play that PSA, everything in the building would stop. All the radios were turned on, and David was on the radio. Bah, there you have it. So as we go forward, we're just continuing to receive and to give. We give everything that we know away. How to do things, how to set up stations, how to. We want to share it. And then the world comes back to us. So here's Tom Depew. He has movement like this. And so I had been for years putting paintbrush in his hand like this so he could paint. And when we worked with an engineer who paid attention to his body, he put the paintbrush on top of his hand. He made a glove so that he could paint like this. Blew my mind. And so he made this glove, which I've been able to replicate with a gardening glove and some Velcro. And I've been able to share that technique with people all over the world, where I get to go and help other organizations start up like Programming to PassionWorks. So our friend Carolyn draws flowers over and over again, and they're magnificent. And we had a visiting artist, Kate Kern, come in, and she showed us how to take paper and take a 2D object and make it 3D with a dart and some staples. And we then took Carolyn's drawings, made a pattern, and started painting on printing plates from the newspaper, because somebody brought them in, like, I don't know if you can use these, and we really didn't have any money, so we were going to just paint these and then have a show. But we learned that when we painted these really thin metal sheets, we could cut it with scissors. And we cut out Carolyn's petal shape, and then we started making these 3D flowers. And we had a show at Casa Nueva restaurant in Athens, Ohio, made these huge flowers, and in 98, and we sold every single one. We had 12 flowers up for $125 each. I was like, all right, great, we can make more, and then, and we just started making these wild things. But it was turning employment upside down. To see David and Serena and my other friends who might have cerebral palsy or the use of only one hand, putting pens together, contorting their bodies to fit the product, I was like, let's have the product designed for the people, you know? And I think that's powerful. Instead of us contorting to and bending a knee to the power, let's make it our own power. So we turned it upside down. We designed this product. People were doing whatever they wanted. If they wanted to write about Smokey Robinson all day long, which we have a woman who does, and she's been writing about Smokey Robinson for 20 years, that's her job. You want to play tic-tac-toe? You want to write numbers to count to 1 million? We had that too. That's your job. And so they continued to be making, and at this point, we've sold over 27,000 of these flowers. Created employment, pays our rent, and they have been and I still love making them. Like, I love these flowers. I love seeing them on porches. I love volunteers coming into the studio and helping us with the metal, watching people work and they be so happy together, as Serena and David. And because the alternative is a factory-style method of work where it's not about the people necessarily, it's about the production and the anonymity of the human involved in the production of something. So I really dig seeing the spirit of our community and our artists in the piece. And then these things are sent all over the world, and every time a person looks at one of the flowers, I hope that they feel the potential in everything, if it's reimagined in a different way. So now the flower is our official flower of Athens, Ohio. And that has brought us all kinds of joy and delight. And it's been used at the university and locally. The flower design was part of fountain design in front of our community center. So inclusion is sometimes being asked, but it's also creating the environment for the action to happen, with the expectation that everybody's going to be involved and that you just figure out how to make that happen. There's Harry in front of the fountain. A lot of his work is around it. And so our artists are absolutely talented. Typically, within institutional care or culture, it is a deficit model. There's a focus on what isn't working. Like, we have to change that behavior. You have negative behaviors, and we just cannot be thinking about polar bears anymore because you talk about them too much. You're annoying people. Well, all you're going to do is think about polar bears. I think, right? So with artists, if we're not obsessed and possessed by some idea, we're not going to make our stuff. So I see obsession as passion and as a positive. And then it's just how it's laid out and presented, how it can be. So Cardin's been doing architectural rendering for 20 years, and he's getting really good. He's awesome with all this practice that he's been able to have in the studio. Smokey Robinson, an interest. And Alexis she's been writing about him for over 20 years. And her passion for Smokey got it, so she's met him twice so far, because I would love to have Smokey come to Athens, Ohio. Smokey Robinson. Jonathan loves animals, beautiful animals. He can draw. And so everything that we do typically is collaborative, but it doesn't have to be. If you want to work on your own piece, that's cool. It's all choice. But we love the collaborative process because it really kind of weaves us together. We feel connected by this. But nobody has to do anything they don't want to do in the studio. Visiting artists really have different takes on it. There's Debbie Griffin and Harry Grimm's rabbit jumping rope that she used as a pattern to make a larger pattern and then put the bunny in the belly. Hilarious. And we've worked with all different artists coming into the studio. These are Tibetan monks. We've had 2 visiting artists with Tibetan monks. Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. And so our artists, in a sense, get to travel. We love international students coming into our studio and working with us, practicing English, us learning new languages. I want our guys and our artists to have international exchange and experiences like anybody else would want to. And this is one way that we can get a touch and a flavor for it. There's Smokey Robinson as a baby monk. And then we got to go to Ohio University and make sand mandalas with the monks. And we were blessed with scarves blessed by the Dalai Lama. You can't make you don't know where you're going to go, but as long as you're open and that you love each other, then all these different kinds of things come to you. And now I am so crazily, I hardly think about anything else because this feeds in all aspects of my life. But this is a orphanage in Chile where I was invited to work. And they said, come, please show us what to do in some of these houses. And it's an organization that is an orphanage for kids with disabilities. And in some of these houses where 150 kids live, some of these kids never get out of bed. And this is not untypical throughout the world because there is a very, very low expectation when a child is perceived as having a disability. Now, if our perception means that somebody's life can be so altered as to getting out of bed for their life and being part of a community, I will do anything I have to do to create the perception and understanding that there is more than this. And I will go anywhere and invite anybody in to avoid this. This is not okay. This is not okay. So here in Athens, Ohio, we have been able to plant a seed for world domination, to reimagine a better place, a better world, a better learning experience, a better way of life, so that we can have connection and purpose and thrive together. And I thank you very much.